As an audiologist, it's so common that patients who have hearing loss are reporting some difficulty hearing in places with background noise. Today, we are here with Tim Trine, who is the CEO of Noopl. Tim, welcome to my podcast. I'm happy to have you here. Let's talk about why hearing is important, especially when there's background noises. What have you found with your team at Noopl creating a technology for background noise? What have you found are the common situations people have trouble hearing?
Sure. Well, I think the first, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to participate in something like this. And hearing loss is insidious and pervasive, right? And I think the stats, most of your audience know, 48 million Americans have some form of measurable hearing loss. But the more important stat is that 68 million Americans, adults, have a problem following conversations in background noise. And I'm no different than the average consumer. In quiet situations, everything's easy. You get into a little bit of background noise and you have to put a lot more effort into that listening, add a little bit of hearing loss, and your favorite restaurant becomes a place that no longer want to go, right? And that's really kind of at the heart and soul of what Noopl is about, because hearing aids are great for compensating for the sensitivity loss that people have, but they're outrageously expensive. And the bigger problem is that they really don't work effectively in background noise. So Noopl was created to singularly target that environment of, let's solve the background noise problem at a price point that everyone can afford.
And that applies to restaurants, group meetings, work meetings, being out with small groups, either family, friends, at your own home. And all these are so important. I think of my parents, I think of my grandparents, I think of growing up, I think of all the patients I've seen over the years that even with the best hearing aids, background noise is challenging, right? It's hard to easily hear conversations in restaurants. So 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% gains make a huge difference in the functional ability of hearing, no doubt. Give us some background, some context of what is your experience working with engineering, electronics, hearing loss,
Sure.
hearing aids, and how that all led up to working with Noopl.
Sure. So my background is in hearing science, PhD from the University of Minnesota in hearing science. And I was planning to be a career academic. First job out of after my PhD was back at Vanderbilt University, where I did my clinical training. And I was chugging away and planning to be a career academic, and then ended up doing some research for a company called Starkey Hearing Technologies. You'll know them as one of the so-called big five hearing aid companies that own about 90% of the global market. Fast forward, a couple of years, and I ended up leaving Vanderbilt, going back to Minnesota, and joined Starkey. Started there to do clinical research, and within a few months was driving product development, because there really wasn't anyone there driving product development from a hearing perspective, right? So I'm an unusual character, I guess, in that my entire career has been about hearing. So I spent 19 years at Starkey, 15 of those 19 years as chief technical officer. And so I had a very large and broad R&D organization. Moved from there to Eargo, which is the first successful hearing aid startup. So they IPO'd last year. And then in January 2020, left Eargo to join Noopl as president and CEO. So it's kind of been in the weeds for hearing my entire career.
Show us Noopl and tell us more about what the technology does. What are the benefits it can provide? How is that different than what's currently available? Again, this is a technology that's worth exploring and understanding from my perspective, because if something can provide even 10% benefit or improvement for hearing conversations in places with ambient noise, background noise, then it's worth understanding. So give us some more details here. You brought it. Can you show us how it works and
Absolutely.
what devices it connects with, please?
As you talked to me, you saw me pop in my second AirPod. And that's the vehicle that we've chosen as our first vehicle for launching. So Noopl is a iPhone accessory, and you can see it there at the bottom, plugged into the bottom of my iPhone. And if I catch it in light just right, you'll see that over here we have 3 MEMS microphones under that little patterned array. And the beauty of it is that as I plug it in, as you notice, as I turn my head left and right, we're using the head motion from AirPod Pros, and now including the Beats Fit Pro are also a viable option. So we get that head tracking data, and it very quickly tracks the head position. But what that means is that I can go into a crowded restaurant, any sort of environment, playing cards at lunch with my friends, and pop in one or two AirPods and just set this down on the table. And now wherever I'm looking, that's who I hear. So you mentioned, even a 10% improvement can provide quite a bit of benefit. Every dB of improvement in signal to noise ratio is in fact about a 10 or 14 dB or 14% rather improvement in intelligibility. The directional array that Noopl provides a 14 dB improvement in that signal to noise ratio. So you can move from literally hearing nothing to hearing with ease the people across the table. And that's really the primary use case for us today, is that crowded environment, and works with AirPods Pros, works with, as I said, the Beats Fit Pro, but it also works with any MFI hearing aid. So you can use this accessory as, unfortunately, many people with traditional hearing aids still can't hear in background noise. So many of our customers are MFI hearing aid wearers, and they use this as an additional help when they get into those challenging environments.
Made for iPhone, MFI really changed the game when it became available. And that's within the last 10 years, correct me if I'm wrong. So showing us what kind of developments and advancements are possible. Who does this work for? If someone wears hearing aids, how much will it help them? Now, when I think of hearing aids, oftentimes they have what's called an open style fitting, meaning that the ear canal is not blocked. When the ear canals are blocked, technology has a lot better time of reducing the background noise. When the ear canals are somewhat open, which a lot of hearing aid users have, how does that affect Noopl and its benefits it can provide? What have you guys studied on that? Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, so one of the reasons that the AirPod Pro is such a great device for us is that it's relatively occlusive, right? And it has managed the occlusion effect with transparency mode beautifully, right? But you're absolutely correct. So if you've got a completely open fitting, or the traditional AirPod, for example, then you have the direct path energy competing with the signal that we're piping in. So for hearing aid wearers, the extent to which that's open will play a role, but more importantly is making sure that they turn their hearing aid microphones off when using Noopl. And that's easy to do for anybody, either through the control panel. Most of the hearing aid manufacturers, if you just slide down on the iTunes 12 at least, so you can slide down from the upper right-hand corner, open up the control panel, and there will typically be the hearing aid manufacturer's control for enabling or disabling the microphone, or you go into the app of that specific manufacturer and make sure you disable the ear level microphone so that Noopl is the only sound that's at least being amplified, right? And then you're only competing with what's leaking around that ear tip.
That's exciting. That makes sense. So there has to be a quick user adjustment to set it up, but once it's set up, it can work well. All right. So exciting stuff here. This is an advancement in the technology of what's available for those who have hearing loss, trying to hear in background noise. How does Noopl compare to things like pre-existing remote microphones or the live listen on an Apple iPhone that was already there?
On our website, we've got some great demos showing head-to-head comparisons of all of those things, right? So you asked a couple things. One is remote microphones from hearing aid manufacturers. Most of those are single omni directional remote microphones, and frankly, they just don't work that effectively. If you get that remote microphone onto the person you're talking to, so clip it to their lapel, then you're golden, right? Because that provides a really good signal to noise ratio, but most users don't want to do that. It's pretty intrusive exercise. So relative to those, and live listen alone, so using the telephone or the cell phone itself as a remote microphone, again, we provide about a 10 dB advantage over that use case. So it's night and day. And again, hearing the difference is probably the most powerful way to experience that. And those head-to-head comparisons are available on Noopl.com. Relative to other, I'd say the only remote microphone that competes well with us would be the Roger microphone. And so the difference there is literally a 10x difference in price. So we compete extremely well in terms of overall performance. I believe our user experience is a little bit easier, right? That's, I suppose, in the eye of the beholder. But from an audio performance perspective, that's the only other product that can even come close to our level of performance. So what I tell people is, we have the best hearing and noise performance regardless of price point, right? Whether you're spending $8,000 on a pair of hearing aids combined with remote microphone technology, or you're spending $200 for a Noopl device combined with AirPods Pro, the AirPod Pro plus Noopl is still going to give you better hearing and noise performance.
Yeah. Wow. And then a comment here on the hearing technology aspect of this. Patients ask their audiologist, Dr. Ben, I just want to fix the hearing loss. I mean, technology is great, but why can't we do anything to actually fix the problem at the cause, the root of the problem, right? Well, hearing loss affects the cochlea, which at this time, those cells cannot be repaired, restructured, or restored. If we were able to do that, that would improve a lot of these speech and noise difficulties, hearing people with background noise. But because science research has not found a way to cure hearing loss, the best way to improve communication is through technology. And hearing aids do a great job, but they fall short given some acoustical science, right, Tim? So would you be able to explain, based on your background, on your studies, on your deep dive into this subject, at a very high level, what's the important point to remember here? The difference between hearing aids in background noise, where the microphones are on my ears, versus hearing people in background noise, where there's a microphone on the table doing some software calculating in real time.
Right. No, I think you've said it perfectly, right? A lot of people like the visual metaphor for hearing, right? And it falls apart, right? Very, very quickly, because eyeglasses are a horrible metaphor for hearing aids, right? So you have to think about, if you want the correct visual metaphor for cochlear hearing loss or sensory neural hearing loss, it's really macular degeneration, right? And just as there are no cures for macular degeneration, there are no cures for sensory neural hearing loss. So the best we can do is really twofold. It breaks down into two things, right? One is compensating for the hearing loss, and that means providing audibility over as broad a bandwidth or range of frequencies as we possibly can. And hearing aids are really effective at doing just that. The problem is, what they're not really effective at is then that added layer of improving the speech to noise ratio. And so they've, with two microphones separated, by 5 to 10 millimeters on the ear, you can only get so much directivity, meaning that improvement in the speech to noise ratio. So most state-of-the-art hearing aids provide about a 5 dB improvement. And the array processing that we're doing here comes from two things. One is the geometry rather, of those microphones being specifically placed. And the other is the mathematics running on that processor, right? So having those three microphones and them housed in the way we house them allows us to provide that 14 dB improvement relative to the 5 dB improvement you can get at the ear. Same thing is true with these devices, right? Conversation Boost is yet another directional array processing that's just like hearing aid directional processing, provides about a 5 dB improvement in the signal to noise ratio, which is helpful, but in a crowded restaurant, it's often not helpful enough. And you see the very, very common scenario of people taking off their hearing aids in a crowded restaurant because they're not effective, right? And so that's what we're trying to overcome. Did I answer your question?
Excellent. Absolutely. Excellent. I'm so happy we're having this discussion. I think we're bringing a lot of value here to our listeners. For those of you who are on YouTube, if you're watching this and learning something about hearing technology, background noise, how technology can help us, please comment below saying, yes, thank you, or yes, thanks to Tim for coming. And Tim, in the last 5 minutes or so that we have together here on this podcast episode, I want to ask you, what is your vision? What is your outlook on the different hearing technologies coming to market, over-the-counter hearing aids, direct-to-consumer hearing aids, and how Noopl fits into all of that? What is your vision for the next few years to come as an industry? We try to collectively help people hear better at an affordable price, as well as create more accessibility to hearing care so that people can get the help they need without feeling burdened by things like having limited access to doctors, hearing aids being too expensive, or not having a local doctor in your area that can provide the service. Just overall take on the industry and where it's heading.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the FDA just did, the guidelines that the FDA just published a couple of weeks ago, we've been waiting for them for a very long time, both in and outside the industry. And I think it's a big win ultimately for consumers, because it forces some better quality control. Part of the problem with the hearing aid industry is that is frankly been a lack of meaningful regulation. And so and the consumer is in the crosshairs, right? They are very struggled tremendously on knowing what's a product that actually is going to provide benefit and what's a product that's not, right? And it's, and that's where traditionally the audiologist and hearing healthcare professional have come in. So they've been a good voice of, kind of separating the wheat from the chaff in terms of products that will work and products that won't work. So the audiologist certainly has a role to play in that entire journey. The problem has been there haven't been any products for people with mild amounts of hearing loss who come in, they're showing up at the clinic because they've got a problem. Typically, they have a problem hearing in background noise. That's the first thing that brings somebody into the clinic. And depending on where they show up and how much hearing loss they have, between 10 and 50% of them walk away without a solution, right? And to me, that's a trap. That's the travesty, right? They walk away because they don't have a $5,000 problem, or they don't have enough of a problem yet. So I think over-the-counter hearing aids are going to fill that gap, right? Those people who may not have a $5,000 problem, but they have a $250, $500 problem, and have technology now that is going to allow them to actually solve that problem. In the past, they may not have had that problem, but it's a complete crapshoot as to whether or not they get a solution. I think the FDA guidance will help level the playing field, and good products will emerge at a price point that's approachable. I also don't see that, making the audiologist superfluous. There's a whole segment of the market that is just not served at all today, right? And so there's another segment of the market that absolutely needs to continue to be served by the audiologists and hearing health care professionals, because of the complexity of those losses, the severity of those losses, and the ongoing monitoring of those losses are critical. But there's this large portion of underserved people that now can be served. That's my view.
Excellent. And my thoughts hearing you are that the patients will best be served when there is vetted high quality technology and professional guidance on how to make that work for the individual. And if we can do that collectively, then we will help many people. Tim, Trine, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge, expertise, and showing us the demonstration of Noopl, how it works. Do you have any last words here for our community?
No, I just want to say thanks and appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Please reach out. We will read the comments. Ben will let me know if there's a comment that I can answer, and we like hearing from people. So don't be shy. You can reach out to me at noopl.com. We certainly love to see you there and here at this within this YouTube channel as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tim. And for anyone who's listening, make sure to check out our other episodes to learn about hearing loss, hearing technology, and tinnitus management. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.